Almost forgot. Unfortunately, Gupta ji isn't here yet, or I don't know if he'll make it. The fog is very bad between here and Greater Noida. He shared with me his thoughts on a title for today's subject. There is nothing you cannot be. There is nothing you cannot do. There is nothing you cannot have. I've shortened the title to Limits, No Limits. Limits, no limits. I was just talking about the limits. Limit your volume at times. Life is filled with this paradox, these opposites. Limits, no limits. And as a youth, I can guarantee you that my thoughts on the subject would be that there should be no limits. That the young people are constantly trying to break through limits. Your parents say, you can't do that, you can't do that. And you're saying, why not? I want to. And in many cases, you will in spite of being told not to. And look at the highways. They have a speed limit, okay? But do people follow this? Generally, no. And what's interesting, even though there's a speed limit, in America, if you go too slow, you can get a ticket too. If you're blocking traffic in the wrong lane, you have to be in the far out lane, not in the center, if you're going to go slower than in normal traffic. And so we all live with this these parameters, and it's fascinating to look at history. And you can go as far back as you want. When I was thinking about this, I must have remembered an incarnation as a Neanderthal man. And so I speak Neanderthal, So I was talking to one of my friends. I was going, and what I was actually saying was, did you see that big woolly mammoth? And he said, he said, yeah, that thing was really big. And I said, do you think we could kill that thing and eat it? And he said, no way. No way can we kill that big thing. And I said, I think we can do it. I'm not getting as much laughter here as I think I should be getting. Anyway, limits. They were constantly thinking about things that people said we would never get to the moon. We did. Some people say we'll get never faster than light travel. But I don't know if this was here in India, a cartoon series from the 60s called The Jetsons. Yes, you're familiar with this? Yeah. So the Jetsons were the futuristic, lived in the future. And Mr. Jetson had he didn't have a car, he had a flying saucery plane sort of thing. And when he got to his destination, he pushed a button and it folded up into a briefcase. And he walked into the house. And they had video phones. So when you called someone, there was video. And of course, we have the video phone, but we don't have the airplane in a briefcase. But there is a working model of an automobile airplane that is actually in production. It'll drive on the road, and then the wings come out and it flies. So it's just, I don't know about the briefcase thing. That's a little hard to imagine. But a Star Trek, the hand communicators, and even push button. You see people with the earpieces in, you push a button and they can make a call or receive a call. So many of the things. I was also thinking about horsepower. How did we end up with horsepower? How did they decide how strong is one horse? Because they're not all equal. But even still, we use horsepower. Your automobile has this many horsepower. So, people are always trying to come up with new and fresh ways to do things. And some of the things that people do today are even more amazing than the technology that I was just mentioning. People who are, well, there was this guy who was taken up into space, and then basically he just jumped out and flew down, and he must have had a parachute at some point. That's no limits. I mean, that's crazy. And this guy with the flying suits, they look like flying squirrels, and it's no limits. Things that I remember when I was 12, 13 years old, skateboarding had just started. It was in its very early years, and now the things they do on skateboards and surfing, it's unbelievable, fabulous. So what does that have to do with our everyday life? Well, we all live in a world that is challenging us to be comfortable, because in the end, people are just basically seeking, in the most basic way, to be comfortable within the world that they found themselves. And of course, the communists thought and they preached that people would be happy if they just had clothing and food and shelter. That was all they needed in order to be happy. But that didn't work out like that. The fact is that people do need more than that. And of course, if you look at the spectrum of people, you realize that there are people who feel more comfortable in limits. Safety. People want to feel safe. And in America, they almost demand that the government protect them from things that are not safe. And if you give them something that's not safe and they get injured, then they sue you. So you should have known better. You shouldn't have. Not that I should have realized that there might be danger in this, but that you should have protected me. So there are people who they want these limits, and we use limits all the time in order to shape behavior. Not speed limits, of course, and all of the laws of society, but social pressures as well, and religious belief pressures. Things that we say, no, you can't do this. When in fact, many of the things, just recently in America, the basic food groups that are the standards of how to eat for good health. Well, if you look at the government standards, they publish this as what they consider to be the scientific understanding about how you should blend your food groups, the 4 food groups, in order to be healthy. And you've seen over the last 50 years that it's changed. So young people will look and say, look, you were wrong. And now you're admitting it. And of course, in America, they had big controversy about this one that came out because the meat lobby, the people who sell meat, were against it because they were minimizing, they're going less and less support for eating of meat. Not only for health issues, but ecological issues as well. It's much more expensive to feed a cow and eat the cow than it is just to eat, to grow the vegetables that you would have fed the cow. You just eat them directly, and it's much more environmentally sound approach. So children, if you raise your child without any limits, what is the general understanding about what will happen? They'll be out of control. They won't be well behaved. That's not always going to be the case, but it's common that not only that, but children feel more comfortable with limits. They feel like they can relax. Says, okay, this is a safe zone. Even though they push the limits, by and large, they want a certain level of limitation. They want to know where the safe zone is, so that they can decide whether they want to go into the unsafe or the unknown. And this tug of war between limits and no limits happens physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We're always under the pressure of these two factors, because just being in a physical body is limiting. You know, it has certain basic functions and abilities which we haven't fully explored. Clearly, we keep stretching those limits, but at the same time, we know that it does have limits. There was a man who invented a parachute suit I think it was in the late 1800s. A parachute suit. So you wore the suit and it had a parachute. I don't know how practical that was for daily life. But anyway, he was an inventor, so he climbed up to the top of the Eiffel Tower and he jumped off. Unfortunately, his invention was non-functional and he expired. Limits. When you push limits, sometimes disaster or apparent disaster takes place. Now, if you look at that from a spiritual point of view, you could have a completely different perception of the value of what he did. Because from a growing your consciousness point of view, he went for it. He believed in what he was doing. He committed himself to it. He must have been afraid to some degree, but just being up there like that would be a little unnerving to most people. And he went and he did it. And what was the outcome? He moved on. He moved on to another incarnation. He didn't actually die. There is no such thing. You just move on. So he really, when you look at the value of learning how to commit yourself to your beliefs, even if they're wrong, that's a very powerful force for the advancement, the evolution of your consciousness. Because when you believe that you can accomplish something, your actual ability to do it increases 100-fold. The thing that most people don't put into the equation is the universe's ability to support us in our beliefs, in our interest in accomplishing anything, whether it be mental, physical, or spiritual, if we will attune ourselves to that higher potential. I've told this story before, but it's one that illustrates this idea. When Yoganandaji was traveling across the country in the 20s, and they're driving down the road, he had a driver, a young fellow who was a driver, and another young man with him. And they're driving down the road, and Yogananda says, "Stop the car." And the driver stops the car, and then right after they stop the car, literally the wheel fell off. One of the rear wheels fell off. And so they all got out and looked at it. And the driver, who was really not a devotee, I scratch my head sometimes when you see people who got so close to a great master and didn't recognize it at all, just didn't get it, and that the master allowed that to happen. You know, you think, well, they would maybe filter the people that got to it. They oftentimes they don't, at least in the way that we might perceive it. Anyway, so this driver said, "Okay, I guess I'll try to walk to the next town and see if I can bring help back." And Yoganandaji said, "No, don't do that. Let's fix it ourselves." And the fellow looks at Yoganandaji and says, "Well, are you a mechanic?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, how could you possibly fix that?" "Oh, no. He's got a secret. He's got a secret access." But this young fellow just didn't believe it, so he walked off to town. And in the meantime, Yoganandaji, looked at it, tuned into it, inwardly attuned himself to the situation, and drew inspiration, thoughts, practical thoughts about how to proceed. And when the fellow came back with help, of course the wheel was back on the car. And the natural reaction to a situation by many people in that circumstance is, it can't be done. Just don't even try. But the truth is, there's lots of people who have survived impossible circumstances, in spite of the fact that it's impossible that they survived. There was a plane crash in America recently, and I don't know, 6, 7, 8 people died, but one little girl lived. And there's lots of stories like this, when people pass what you would call normal limits, things that happen. And isn't all of nature like that? Nature is evolution, is something new is always taking place. Things are always changing, but they're always evolving. And that evolution is always forward. I say it's always forward, but sometimes you have catastrophe that, for example, the plague in Europe, and I think it was more than 50% of the population of Europe passed. I can't remember the exact percentage. Huge. I mean, imagine half the people gone in a short period of time. So sometimes when you limits cause dramatic transformation, and but it always moves forward. And when we look at our lives and think about the areas where we feel limited, we feel stuck, we feel kids growing up in college today often feel like they're on a track that they never had any control over, and then they feel pressured to do well, and there's this oppressive feeling, this anxiety that becomes quite strong, and even some students have committed suicide because of this. But adults feel this too when you have a job and you have a family that you're supporting, and your boss starts yelling at you for some reason, and you're afraid that you're going to lose your job, or you're a salesman and you haven't met your quota for the month, and there's pressure and you're worried about it, and what if I get fired, and all of these things come to mind. And when we think about how we're living, if we look at it and analyze the totality of the way that we live, the way that we approach the way that we live, do we always take the easy track, or do we always take the more challenging track? In the youth in America in the last 10, 20 years, there's been a very strong no limits consciousness, a very strong, and of course we could take this back. There's elements of social growth back to in American society, back to the beatniks in the 50s. They were the hippies of the 50s, and then the biker gangs, they're saying no limits, and then the hippies said no limits, and then generations of people who have Gen X and such, who have entered into society, but saying, I embrace civilization, but I embrace it with no limits. And no longer will people as easily accept what they're told. They want to experience it, to understand it for themselves. They don't want to just be told, I figured it out, so just take my word for it. They want to understand it, and then they want to surpass it. Well, we should understand that remember we talk about the attributes of God, and I'm promoting the inclusion of the ninth attribute of God, which is what Yoganandaji, when he described ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy. He says ever new. I'm on the promoting that the attribute that God is ever new. That all of those attributes, they're ever new, and that in itself, that life is ever new. That no matter what happens, the ups and downs of life, it's ever new. And we need to keep that consciousness in our consciousness if we want to live life as fully as we can. If you've made dal, you think about those of you who cook regularly, how many times have you made dal? And do you always do it exactly the same way? Or is it a little different every time? And are you willing to spice it slightly, be adventurous, do something new? Or do you stick to the only the one way? And do you, if you're a mother and you happen to have raised a daughter and you're teaching her to cook, how rigidly do you require her to cook it the way you cook it? Or do you teach the principles of cooking and let them discover for themselves what works and what doesn't work? So this ever newness is something that we want to bring into our daily lives. Even if, psychologists will say, look, just drive to work on a different street. Tell the men if you're used to shaving from the right side first, shave from the left side first. But and some of these little differences seem kind of silly to me because they're on a shallow level. We need to take it deeper. And yes, we can use these little things to remind us to be ever new. When you sit to meditate, do you approach it as if, oh yes, another same old meditation, and here's how it's going to go? And that's like when I see people doing these what they call air kisses. You hug somebody and you don't kiss their cheek, you kiss next to their cheek. And I think it's something to do with the ladies not wanting to get their lipstick all messed up or something. I have to admit, I don't fully understand it. But what I see is people not actually connecting when acting in a way that's supposed to represent connecting. I mean, that's what it's supposed to do, isn't it? You're saying, hey, I care about you. I feel connected to you. And then you distance yourself from it. And you make it more shallow. And we need to live in a way that is more embracing and more committed to the things that we're doing and believing. And the more we live that way, the greater the success we'll have in life, and most importantly, the greater fulfillment that we'll have inside ourselves. So this idea, the title also that Guptaji, he wrote it in a certain way. That there's nothing you cannot be, there's nothing you cannot do, there's nothing that you cannot have. Well, I see three there is nothings. There is nothing. And this is one of the most powerful things to understand about life. That life it's something that's nothing. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it is very clearly not what it appears to be. And if we look at this in terms of limits, we think we have many limits, when in fact those limits are illusions. They're not factual limits. If you get into trouble and you're thrown into jail, and there's a wall around your living space, you say, well, I have very concrete and iron limits. But the fact is that people escape from jails all the time. So, and even if they don't escape physically, they can escape inwardly. And this is something that Kriyanandaji emphasized many times over the years, this idea that no matter what happens outwardly, you have the inward freedom to choose your reaction to that life experience. And that if you choose positivity, if you choose enthusiastic forward motion, if you choose attunement to universal reality instead of ego likes and dislikes, then you will experience greater potential. You'll transcend the limits of that most people live in. So you find the fabulous story about a woman named Corrie ten Boom, who was in one of the concentration camps in World War II. And she was so attuned to spirit that she just brought this incredible light into the concentration camp. In the most brutal of circumstances, she was a beacon of light. And we live in our sort of day-to-day humdrum lives. We can often feel, depressed or uninspired or a little numb, going through the motions, feeling like life's not as rosy and sunny as we would have preferred. We're thinking, well, wait a minute. I'm in my own car driving down the road. I've got a job. I've got food on the table. I've got a house. I've got a family. There's no bombs blowing up next door. And I can't find happiness. Well, this woman who's in this terrible environment is radiating light and bliss. So it was limits. We have to break the limits of thinking that the light, the joy, the bliss is going to be somewhere else if we can just get there. So I just need to get somewhere in there. But the reality is that's not completely wrong. We do need to get somewhere in there, but that somewhere is right here. God and joy and bliss, fulfillment is not out there somewhere. It's right in here. It's present. But we have to attune ourselves to it. We have to open ourselves to it. We have to commit ourselves to it. When you think about these people who break limits, they are people who take chances. They're willing to risk it all. I mean, that's what I say, this guy who jumped off the Eiffel Tower, that guy was committed. He was a little crazy, I guess, but nevertheless, I admire that. And the idea that we shouldn't do something just because somebody might die, as in space travel. So we've had a few big disasters, and people died in the space program. And so there's some people say, well, it's not worth it. People die all the time just driving to the market. So I think it's worth it. And I guarantee you that the people who died, if you could communicate with them, they would say absolutely continue the program. That this is just when you take chances, you might get bruised, you might get shaken up, but if you talk to people who are adventure oriented, they will say that you never feel more alive than when you're right on the edge. Now, as yogis, we don't seek emotional excitement in that way. We seek our connection to eternal well-being, which is actually on a much larger scale. The excitement, the adrenaline rush that people get when they live outwardly with no limits consciousness is not. It's a drop in the ocean of our potential for well-being, and also what happens with some people is that they limit their ability to receive solutions and inspirations because they live in the limited thinking process that they've grown up with. This is a challenge in India today when people have come through the educational system, which is very academically limited. It's not designed for free thinking and expansive thinking. It's designed for 2 + 2 is 4. And it's very linear in that sense. It's well within the box. And it's not that we shouldn't be able to function well in the box, but we also have to learn to go outside of the box. And no limits means going out into territories that you're unfamiliar with. But just like Yogananda was unfamiliar with mechanics, he had learned how to access that universal connection to the unfamiliar. And then that becomes the familiar. So he became used to the idea that he could access information that he didn't previously know that he would need. Had he, as a young boy, realized that one day he would stop on the side of the road in the middle of the countryside in America, he might have been inspired to study mechanics. But that wasn't really a necessary part of his education. In fact, he didn't even want to complete university. He didn't see that kind of education as being particularly meaningful. And you sometimes wonder, well, why did Sri Yukteswar make him do that? But one of the messages that Yoganandaji brought to the world was that you have to learn to live within limits with no limits. That these are simultaneous truths. That you recognize that there are certain physical plane, I don't want to really say realities because they're not as written in stone as we're used to. But there are parameters that within which we live on what we would say a day-to-day basis, but that we can transcend those parameters if we practice living unlimited inside of ourselves. So if you think, if you think that you will take 5 years to have a deep meditation, then it'll take 5 years or more. But if you think that you could have a deep meditation in 5 minutes, then you open yourself up to that possibility. And the reality is you don't actually know when that blessed moment will come and you feel God's presence flowing into your consciousness. So why not live in two things? Why not expect it sooner rather than later? And two, as Yoganandaji said, why wait? If you want to feel joy, meditate with joy. If you want to feel God's presence, meditate with the consciousness that God is present. We've hypnotized ourselves into limitation consciousness, and we have to free ourselves. We have to break out of the jail of that limitation and live more and more in the awareness that there is no limit to what we can accomplish, but we have to focus ourselves in the directions that will be most useful to us. Bless you. I could become a rocket scientist, but is that really necessary? I don't need to break all limits. Is this what I've chosen to do in this lifetime? You're not going to do everything in one incarnation. But so we have to choose. But once we've chosen, we've found ourselves in circumstances, and some of which we've chosen, some which have presented themselves through karmic circumstance. We have to choose to find those avenues of freedom from limitation that we feel drawn to. Most centrally, most importantly, is our connection to spirit, our connection to universal access to the highest ultimate universal potential. In Yoganandaji's affirmation for material success, one of the sections that I've always appreciated is He says, I can do everything when so I think, when so I think. And this is something that we want to live with more and more, is not thinking I can't. Think more, of course I can, but should I? Is this what I should be doing? Not whether you can or you can't. My daughter went to university. She studied psychology. She thought she wanted to work with dolphins, but and she worked in a zoo with exotic animals of many different kinds. But she, she was just kind of moving forward, and then she got a job as a veterinary technician, someone who helps the veterinarian. And she was looking, one day she saw the veterinarian and said, I could do that. So she went back to school, picked up some classes that she needed, and then she went to applied to veterinary school and did an accelerated program. And she went from graduating university and not knowing what to do with herself to becoming a veterinarian in, it took her 4 or 5 years to make that shift. But she saw that goal and she committed herself to it and she manifested it. And I found that very inspiring. And this we can do in every aspect of our life. Any area that you feel is not as unlimited as it could be, seek to free it. Even if it's just new sheets on the beds, new drapes, new ways of eating, new ways of entertaining yourself. I've learned had many hobbies over the years, and I've always found that one of the most exciting things about doing something new is it's new. And it's okay to start at the bottom again. Being a student is fabulous. We should never stop being students and learn something new. Free yourself from that you kind of get used to. You get in the track, in the groove, and there's like there used to be a ride at Disneyland, little cars. You get in the car and you drive it, but the car had these bars underneath, and they went underneath this track. You could steer only a little bit. You couldn't go any further. So there was no way to bump into anything. The only way you could go was forward within a very narrow track. And this is how most people live. We want to free ourselves from that. When Sri Yukteswar said, in regards to karma, you're on the train. You can't get off the train of your karma, but you can move around in the train. We need to learn to move around in the train more, with more conscious intent to explore our possibilities. And don't ever feel like you can't learn something new, that you can't push forward. And most importantly, don't ever give up spiritually. Don't ever accept that I haven't felt God's. I haven't gone into samadhi, so it's not going to happen in this lifetime. And I accept it. Don't ever accept that. Don't ever accept that you've gone as far as you can go. And the more you apply yourself to that, no matter whether you make it or not, you're speeding up the eventual reality of it. Whatever you desire must come to you. That was the last one. You can have whatever you want. It's true. You will have whatever you want. So be careful about what you want. Because do you really want to come back for it? I was talking to some friends last night, and I said, I love pizza. But not enough to come back for it. Please hear me. I do love pizza, but not enough to come back. It's okay. You don't want to. It's playing with fire when you start going too far in that direction. But through the practice of Kriya, through the practice of deep meditation, we free ourselves from those little limitations. And then we expand ourselves into that ultimate unlimited state of divine consciousness. This is the only way that we can really experience an unlimited potential in God, in infinite spirit. This is who we are. This is where we're going. We're going home to our own selves. And this is the ultimate reality. We want to bring that ultimate reality into our everyday life and then live with the enthusiastic companionship of God's presence in your life. And have that inner conversation that says, Lord, what fun are we going to have today? What new heights are we going to climb today? What new avenues of service, of caring, of loving, of sharing? All these are the ways to free ourselves from unhappiness and to be happy and experience ever greater levels of well-being, no matter what it looks like on the outside. Namaste.